Alright, what's up, busters? I got a banger here for you today. I'm going to be polishing my vintage CASIO A158W and seeing what happens. Now, right away I want to mention I picked up a Yeti Blue microphone. You guys have been dogging me all left and right for my audio quality, and for good reason, so I made the switch, and hopefully this helps. Now, before we get into polishing, let's take a quick look at the watch. Like I mentioned, this is the CASIO A158W, and you can find it on Amazon for about 20 bucks. This watch was released by Casio in 2009, and the design pays homage to older Casio watches from the 1980s and 1990s, like the Casio A152. Let's talk about the watch itself first. Now, the case appears to be chrome-plated, and it has a solid and consistent polished finish. It's not a perfect mirror finish, but it looks fantastic for the price point. On the bottom, we've got a stamped stainless steel back cover with a brushed finish. I think we'll go ahead and try to polish that guy up a bit after we do the band. Now, let's talk about the band. The band on this little old big dog is very low profile. The links are stainless steel and they have a brushed finish. Now, I've worked with enough stamping dies and bent sheet metal in my days to know a stamped part when I see it. These links are clearly stamped, but they still look really good. The seams where the links bend back into themselves are nearly imperceptible to the naked eye. A couple final notes before we cross the line of no return and polish this guy. I bought this watch back in January of 2024, and I'm making this video in November 2024. So I've averaged wearing this maybe once or twice per week in the last 10 months or so, and it still looks and works like it did on day one. So I hope I don't botch this watch by attempting to polish the band and the back cover, but if I do, we all will have learned something today, my men. Now, I also want to say I'm not a professional polisher, but I have polished a fair few aluminum, stainless steel, and other steel alloy specimens in my day. And ideally, if you're going to polish, you would want to run through a gamut of abrasive levels starting relatively close to the surface finish where the part begins at and ending where you want the surface finish to end up. I'm only using Mother's Mag and aluminum polish compound today instead of running through a gamut of abrasive options, and Mother's is a very fine abrasive. So for that reason, we're not going to be polishing away the band or the back cover to a mirror finish, and we won't be taking out the visual markings on the band from the brushing operation, but we should at least be able to get a nice luster in on each from this polish. Alright, let's get this band off so we can get to polishing. I removed the size adjusting clasp bar with a flathead screwdriver, and I used the spring pin removal tool from my watch care kit to remove the spring pins. I will link the watch care kit that I used in the description. It's a good kit for 15 or 20 bucks, but I'm not sponsored. Removing the pins is actually extremely easy if you have the right tools. Just be mindful to avoid shooting pins across your room while you remove them, since you're loading them in compression. If you do end up losing one or both pins, it's not the end of the world. Just know that if you get a watch care kit, they usually come with many extra pins in standard sizes, just for that reason. Alright, let's get that last band half off and admire that watch. It's just a dandy, ain't it? Let's get going on that first band half. Like I mentioned, we're starting with a dull brushed finish. And when using Mother's polish, I like to apply a thin layer and let it sit for a few seconds to a minute before I buff it away with a clean microfiber towel. Make sure to use something like a clean microfiber towel because you want the polish to be your abrasive, not the towel itself. If you use a hard towel or even a soft towel that's contaminated with any dirt or debris, then those contaminants will become your abrasive media and will cause scratching and just a terrible outcome. I also recommend wearing gloves whenever you work with chemicals. Alright, so I've let the polish sit for a few seconds. Now I'll buff it away with a clean microfiber towel. This is not an exact science, at least at the level I'm doing it, so don't worry too much about not giving the polish enough time to sit before buffing. So the polishing process is pretty straightforward and hard to mess up if you use soft and clean towels with an appropriate compound. I just went through the process a handful of times until I was satisfied with the result. And again, I'm not going to get a perfect mirror finish here because I skipped all the rougher grit polishing steps that would have been needed to get all the rough imperfections out. But I'll still at least have a better surface finish shine by the end of this. Alright, let's look at the polished band half side by side with the unpolished half. And before doing that, I'm going to try to wipe the polished half clean with an unused portion of the blue towel. If I use a dirty part, it's just going to keep smearing some of that polish compound residue in, and you won't see any of the luster. The difference between the polished and unpolished halves is definitely more apparent in person than in the video, but I think you can still see some extra sheen on the polished half in the video, even after only a few minutes of polishing. I think this next clip does the best justice in showing the difference between the polished and unpolished halves. I showed the unpolished first, but when using both to try to see the reflection of the mother's can, the polished half obviously reflects a clearer image. Look at that, my man. And there it is, the reflection with the unpolished half is obviously less clear. I was satisfied with how the first half turned out, so I just polished the second half the same. And a quick sidebar, my friends, I want to thank you for sticking with me so far, and please subscribe if you're enjoying what you see, and always feel free to comment anything else you want to see. Alright, now with both halves polished and wiped off with another clean towel, this is what we're working with. It's not a crazy difference from where we started, but it's definitely noticeable, and it's been an extremely straightforward process. The microfiber towels have also done a great job at removing any excess polishing compound without much effort. Like I promised, let's polish that brushed stainless back cover while we're at it. You might be able to get away with polishing it without disassembling, but the hassle of removing the 4 screws is not a big deal to me. With the 4 screws removed, I carefully removed the back cover and set the watch aside. Be mindful that there is a gasket here which is necessary for the water resistance rating on the watch. Try not to jack up that gasket if you care about the waterproofing. Just like with the watch band halves, there's no magic here. I just apply the polish, let it sit briefly, and then buff it out with light to medium pressure. As expected, you can easily see that the surface reflectivity is improved, but the markings from the brushing operation are still present. After a couple more rounds of polish, you can really see that luster come through, so I give it a final clean with a nice clean microfiber towel and set it aside. Now, I'll go ahead and put the back cover back on. You might be able to put this on turned 180 degrees, but I just made sure to install it the same direction as it was originally installed. I'll finish this old dog up by reattaching the band halves, and this cow will be back in the barn. The A158 is all polished up and back together. Like I mentioned before, it's not a massive difference, but it's definitely noticeable, and I think the watch looks a bit better now with the polishing. This is obviously irreversible, and I probably would not practice this on a much more expensive watch, but I'm glad I polished this one. I think it looks good. And it's worth mentioning that now that it's polished, the band does show signs of fingerprints and smudges more easily than when it was a bare bones brushed finish, but it's not terrible, and I do still prefer the look after polishing. And hey, don't forget to put that adjustable clasp bar back on. So thanks for watching and supporting the channel. Please subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed, and as always, feel free to drop a comment, and also let me know if you have any suggestions for future videos.